Start. It's about 6. This is our October meeting for our waterways of Louisiana. We got a vision statement here I want to talk about. So LDEQ seeks to promote water quality advocacy through building relationships, education, and community outreach and engagement. And education, outreach, and engagement are key components to success for any restoration plan, and the participants were the key. And then in 2 months, in December, we have a motto, we call it Walnut Bayou. It's a great one, and I hope I can see y'all again. So, and we'll send those emails out right after this meeting. Well, we got Michael here from the Pontchartrain Conservancy, and he's going to present on water quality and habitat restoration in Lake Pontchartrain Basin.
All right, thank you. So again, my name is Michael Hopkins. I'm the science director for Pontchartrain Conservancy, based in the Metairie area. So this is a nice picture of Lake Pontchartrain with the new canal lighthouse. It's one of our offices. I unfortunately don't have an office in that building. I'm on Causeway Boulevard, like 3 blocks from the lake. Can't see the lake. But the main goal and the overarching theme of this presentation is just to give you kind of a smattering. It's going to be a lot of information, but it's just little snapshots of the project work that we do within the science programming, and to just give you kind of a flavor of the types of projects we work on and what we've done to date. So this is just some boilerplate language about who we are, what we do. I always like to point to the map because that is our purview. That's where we tend to focus most, if not all, of our work within what we call the Pontchartrain Basin. All the watersheds that flow into Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Maurepas, as well as the coastal waters on the east side of the river out to the Chandler Islands. So anything that's happening that relates to the environment generally is something that we might be concerned with and want to take a look at. But our vision and mission statement really guides our work. So, I mean, we are a mission-based nonprofit organization. So that just kind of gives you just the general language of what we work on. And our work is kind of built on pillars, if you will. Mine, obviously, is more on the research side because I'm the science director. But we do a lot in the education and the advocacy space. We have an education department focusing largely on K-12 education, getting what we take as our science research and getting it into the schools, into the region. We find a lot of times that our grade schools don't really focus on regionally important kinds of problems. And that's something that's a need that we fill. As well as the advocacy side of things, we try to take our scientific understanding, what we do in-house, and build on how do we make decisions at the local level, at the parish, state, or even federal levels that are relevant to our basin. This kind of gives you, kind of the generals of how we work. My organization, if you are familiar with my organization at all, you know that we originally started as the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation back in 1989. This is our 35th anniversary this year, just last month. Largely driven by these kinds of environmental problems that were rampant in the 1980s. The ecosystem was polluted and was declining, and due to a combination of factors like saltwater intrusion, habitat loss, agricultural runoff, nutrient overload, that's what spurred my organization's development, was water quality, by and large. And we did win 2 really big things at that time. Shell dredging ended, and new oil and gas well development was stopped in Lake Pontchartrain. So those were 2 really big environmental wins that kind of largely get forgotten, but my organization was key to getting that done. And, as the bumper sticker said, save the lake, right? We've moved on in terms of our purview from just water quality. So now I'm kind of giving you what we do today. And now we have one science department. So late last year, we had previously been a water quality department and a coastal department. I was the former coastal head. And we merged into one department with 2 arms, still water quality and coastal. And so what I'm going to do with the rest of the presentation is go into each program, and then individual projects that we work on within each program. So on the water quality side, I'll talk a little bit about our baseline monitoring program, as well as our on-site wastewater treatment inspection programs. And then for our coastal side, I'll talk at length about our habitat restoration work. So water quality. This is our longest running project. We have been collecting water quality data around Lake Pontchartrain for more than 20 years now. That's an extraordinarily large data set, and really one of the only things that its kind in the region. We sample 12 sites. That can fluctuate a little bit depending on individual funding streams, but generally we target high visibility, highly accessible areas where people will tend to gather and get into contact with the water. We do this on a that's bi-weekly monitoring Lincoln Beach. So yeah, Lincoln Beach we just started back in June, but we sample these sites on a weekly basis on Tuesdays, and we get the samples submitted to the lab for publish on Friday. We do this 50 weeks out of the year. We miss Mardi Gras and Christmas, or the week of Christmas. But for 50 weeks, this is what we generate. We look at bacterial levels. We also look at general water quality information like temperature, visibility, salinity, and dissolved oxygen. And we publish it. So we have an app up here at the top, Lake and Coast. You can download this from your Android or iPhone store. You'll get our weekly water quality data will be uploaded every Friday. And we post it on our website as well. But like I said, this is an extraordinary data set because we now have more than 20 years of continuous monitoring data for Lake Pontchartrain. So it's valuable. It can be expensive to continue to maintain, but we get funding to do this kind of work because we see a need for it. One of our other long-running programs, I forget exactly how long this has been going on, but nonetheless important, is our on-site wastewater treatment system. So rural areas that are not connected to municipal wastewater treatment will have either these, what we call ATUs, and I'll explain what that is, or septic systems. ATUs, they basically use air to help break down the solids within sewage and treat it on site, so it's not connected to a sewer line. But we've been working on this for more than 20 years of helping people, businesses and homeowners maintain their systems. We've gone out and we've inspected both businesses and homes to see how these systems operate. And what we have found largely is that upwards of about 50% of the systems are in failure at any given time. So if you're not connected to the sewer system and you're just in a neighborhood, you're looking at houses, chances are 1 out of every 2 of those homes don't have a properly working wastewater treatment system. And so what happens? Well, that water that's going into the system, if it's not treated, it discharges somewhere, usually into ditches and open ditches and then into waterways. If it's not treated properly, that means that you have potentially raw or untreated sewage getting into the waterways. That's bad for a number of reasons, which I'm sure you can imagine. Things like but even things that you wouldn't necessarily think about, things like mosquitoes that can inhabit waters like that because there's very little oxygen. They tend to thrive because there's no predators. You also get the downstream effects of having untreated or undertreated sewage water in these types of systems that can make people sick. And so we have a new project right now in Hopkins Parish, which is a parish we have not previously looked at. So we've looked at parishes largely along the North Shore, and that 50% failure tends to hold. More than that, what we have seen is that even when we go in to an area and get people into compliance, if we then repeat, within about 18 months, it's back up to a high, about 50% failure. And it's typically simple failures, as in it requires an aerator. So air has to be pumped into the container that's treating the sewage because it's aerobic breakdown, so it needs oxygen. It's not working anymore. There's power surge and it just gets cut off and the homeowner doesn't have to check it. Or the air pipe gets clogged, full of ants or something like that. You know, it's trivial failures, but people don't typically know to check it. And that's one thing that we have focused on, is getting out there and helping homeowners understand that. So this is our Plaquemines Parish project. This was looking at these systems in order to understand, one, how are they doing? Are they similar or the same, you know, less failure, more failure than other coastal parishes? And what are the failure types? How are they failing? The idea is because we want to help these systems be resilient. Plaquemines is close to the coast. It feels the brunt of tropical storms, weather. It feels the brunt more so than probably any other coastal parish. And we have noted a number of issues. We looked at 100 residences and 40 businesses, and we just finished last week. So this is brand new information. And the failure rate for the homes is about 65%. So 65 of those 100 residences were in failure for reasons that I mentioned previously. The businesses, we don't talk about them in terms of failure. It's whether they're in compliance with their permit. 38 of the 40 were not in compliance. Any questions about the Basin monitoring or the inspection for move on? Yeah.
Are the owners or whoever of these systems, are they pretty eager to help, or do you get pushback?
No, not necessarily pushback, but most of the time it's just they didn't know.
Yeah, but once they do,
That we need to kind of drill down. So as part of our inspection, we have a homeowner survey where we actually talk to the resident, ask them, are they the owner, are they a renter, you know, do you know anything about the system? Largely they don't know, and they don't care. That's a lot of it is they don't know, or they're just sort of casual, like, oh, okay, thanks.
No repercussions.
No.
Yeah, as
We're
long
not
as that
enforcing.
silver lever, as long as that silver lever works.
But see,
That's
right,
it.
yeah, and they don't realize it, you know, when you explain it to people and say, well, if your system's not working properly, you're likely, you know, you're gonna have a pump out. So that's hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get a pump out of your system. Whereas if it were working properly, you wouldn't need a pump out that often. So it's a $20, $30 fix, and maybe like $2 a month to run the aerator and electricity versus $600 every couple of years.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
The first one, what's the solution to that? Just inserting a air line or something?
Yeah, this is just going into a fiberglass tank. This is a picture Robbie took, so he could probably tell you a lot more about it. But yes, it's just going into a tank. There is no treatment.
Okay.
There's nothing happening that would tend to break down the solids. So yeah, it needs the aeration.
Okay, and the second one is that it's overflowing because it's just not.
It's just, yep,
not
it's just
working.
overflowing. That's behind a gas station. That's a commercial one.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, because Plaquemines is very, you know, it's very slender, right? You're not very far from the water. I'm just running into the wetlands.
Yeah, in Plaquemines, because being more coastal and even more flat and subject to inundation than here, I can remember, you know, after Rita, there was issues with people trying to rebuild over in Southwest Louisiana because they couldn't put a regular sewer treatment system in, it wasn't allowed anymore. Are you seeing that kind of issue in Plaquemines with the repeated flooding, and are these systems needing to be changed out to something that works better in those kind of habitats?
You're hitting the nail on the head. That's why we're doing it. We're trying to understand where the failures are. And I mean, we just finished last week, so we're gonna start combing through not only, you know, what's happening with the failure, why are they failing, but why, you know, maybe residents, why are they not engaged? Is it simply, you know, is it a combination of problems? And clearly it's a higher failure rate than most other coastal parishes, so we kind of want to, that's what we want to drill into.
Yeah, because I know in Holly Beach, people wanted to rebuild, they couldn't rebuild unless they would have to like all get together multiple homes to get a system that would work in that, on the coast. And that really, you know, I would think that that could cause some more issues here in Plaquemine, especially when you get into lower Plaquemine.
Did you have a question?
It's a previous slide. It said you sample on Tuesdays. Why would the reason be Tuesday instead of any other day? Is it more pollutants on that day?
No, it's just
okay.
consistency. I think in terms of getting, you know, not necessarily on a Monday, but having the results by the end of the week.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think any particular reason, but earlier in the week is better because you can get the results faster and still be sort of
And holding time.
real time. Yeah. So we don't make any exceptions for rain events,
Mhm.
but we do see, yes, after a rain event, there's a spike.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So that's our water quality side of things. This is our habitat restoration. So Pontchartrain Conservancy has not been doing habitat restoration as long as water quality. We've only been doing it since about 2010. But since that time, we've planted around 100,000 trees throughout the Pontchartrain Basin at roughly a pace now of about 5,000 per year. We're active in 5 different locations across the basin, and I'll get more into where those are in a minute. We also have marsh work, where we monitor a marsh creation project by East St. John. We've been doing that since 2013. We've also branched out into new habitat types, oak ridge and submerged aquatic vegetation. I'll get more into the weeds a little bit later. But that's a fairly recent habitat type that we've been taking a deeper dive into. And it's smaller scale, only about 500 to 1,000 trees per year. Anyway, kind of zoom out across the basin. We began in 2010 around the Carnarvon freshwater diversion. If you're familiar with the geography, Carnarvon is down here, just below the city. See my cursor? That's Carnarvon. Carnarvon's been operating as a freshwater diversion since 1991. If you know anything about freshwater diversions, they are designed to exclude sediment. They're not designed to build land, they're just designed to allow fresh water to flow into the basin.
That's it.
Nevertheless, we noticed that land building is happening. There is sediment in the water, not a whole lot, but there's enough to start to build land, small scale, within that outfall. And so we wanted to take advantage of that opportunity and see, hey, can we replant it? Can we make it swamp again? And so we started planting swamp species, primarily cypress, bald cypress, water tupelo. We've branched out into some other species like green ash, swamp maple. So cornerstone swamp species is what we target. Another advantageous thing that happened was the closure of the Mystic Go, which happened after Katrina. And with that, if you know anything about the MRGO, it's right down here. There's 2 closure structures. One is down here, it's a rock dam, that's to prevent saltwater intrusion. And the other closure is up here, it's the Great Wall of Louisiana, it's to prevent the surge from coming into the industrial canal. But the MRGO, if you know the history about that, caused a lot of saltwater intrusion to happen, but when it closed, salinities throughout the entire basin started to decline. We have measurements from all throughout Maurepas and the lake of salinities declining over the last 15 years. None. So when I say declining, I mean, back here, you probably went from about 2 or 3 parts per thousand to maybe 1. But it's a significant decline because cypress can't tolerate anything greater than about 2. Once you get beyond 2 parts per thousand for cypress trees, they start to get stressed out and die. You need less than 2. So with the closure, all this area, or a lot of it, not say all, but a lot of this area, we're now under favorable salinity conditions to be replanted. And so that's why we focus on this so much, because now's the time. Since this Carnarvon, we've expanded into 4 additional areas. So the central wetlands right here, this wetland area is entirely enclosed within the levee system, but it's still a very valuable piece of real estate for habitat. The LaBranch wetlands, the Maurepas land bridge, and Madisonville, just south of Madisonville, is another per se. So like I said, since the end of this last planting season, we've planted around 100,000 trees, and our survival rate has been more than 65%. So, I mean, I say that's kind of low. That's probably the lowest we've seen. But by and large, the trees are surviving. The rates are variable, and they depend on a lot of different factors. One example, this area around Carnarvon has poorer survival rate, but it's not a huge amount. Survival rates back here are a little bit higher, but growth rates tend to be higher down here because you have the influence of the fresh water and the nutrients coming from the river. They tend to be slower out here. So we think that that's probably a combination of things like nutrient availability. Hurricanes certainly can cause mortality. So we're seeing differences across the basin, but by and large, good survival. So it's kind of the main thrust of the swamp restoration work. And that's a lot of information to throw out on one slide. So if you have a question right now.
All right, I got one.
Yeah.
When the diversion's displacing sediment instead of planting, how you prevent the sediment displacement? Because we got it happening right now down the Virgin Canal into Lake Marpaw. And when you're getting into the mouth right there, you got sediment building up and there's no dredging projects. But it can be a hazard for boating, et cetera. So what's a remedy?
A remedy for what? What do you think?
The sediment deposits that are taking place from the diversion canal.
Mm-hmm.
They dug a diversion canal through Ascension Parish to divert water from the Amite River.
Mm-hmm.
And what it's doing now is depositing sediments at the mouth of the lake.
Right.
And you're starting to get a lot of deposit, but there's nothing being done, and it's now becoming more of a recreational hazard.
Right, I got you.
So, there's the question.
I mean, that's an engineering problem.
Well, and it's also natural. It's also
Yeah.
natural for a river to build those little delta flats like that at their mouth.
Yeah. So if you can't dredge it, you can engineer your way around it. Basically, if you ever see like at the end of Southwest Pass where they have these jetties that come off,
Yeah.
and they do this at the end. What that kink does at the end is it speeds the water up right at the end. So
Okay.
the
So it'll
shoaling
push it through.
It pushes
Yeah.
it through.
The velocity.
So
makes the
some
velocity.
kind of engineering to accelerate the raw water right at the end might help if there's good flow, but.
Yeah, that's a natural process, like he's saying, the delta formation. That's why what's happening at Carnarvon is happening. It's a natural process to create the delta. But if you have a navigation channel, then you're having to artificially maintain that
Yeah.
navigation channel by dredging.
Well, it's not all natural there. I went to one of the public meetings for the Amite River Basin Master Plan, and I recommended that, number one, they fix the weir, because as that weir has subsided, more of the flow's gone down the diversion and less down the lower Amite. So it's lacking of flow down there. And then the other part is fix the source of the sediment. Dredging would do nothing because you're not addressing the source. So fix the source, thus reduce the amount that's coming down, and then fix the weir, you increase the flows and velocities in that lower channel to help keep it cleaned out somewhat. And when I mentioned that, the guy said, well, we're on the same page. So they have that in mind. So, and I mentioned to him, I encouraged them to look at natural channel design as well in the upper reaches. So they have that, in their part of their master plan potentially.
There's only a few ways you can deal with sediment. You can either take it out, dredging it, you can speed up the water, or you can add more water. That's.
Or you can let it flow through the wetlands and deposit it, like what's gonna happen with the
Take the
Marpaw
sediment
version.
out before it gets there, you saying?
Go through.
Yeah,
through
go
the-
through wetlands and
Go
then-
through the wetlands before
Push
it
it
gets
through
to the open
Amite
water.
Like a
into the
tertiary type
Marpaw
treatment.
Swamp.
Yeah. Now,
Well, that's like the Marpaw Swamp diversion is going to be channeling through the swamp before it gets into the waterways. And it's also not designed to be capturing the sediment, but you expect some fines to be part of that.
One of the things they said is where the sand and gravel mines are, and they have plans to look at an abandoned mine and purchase it, that at least that's in their discussions, and reestablishing floodplains and all. But the channel is twice as wide as what it should be up there.
Yeah.
The key word in all these discussions is maintenance, which is a bad word in the Louisiana legislature.
Yeah.
They don't want to give you money for the maintenance. And so that becomes a problem. And the
But
other
actually,
thing-
another part of it is if you let the rivers, you help them out so that they are self-maintaining in a stable channel.
Yeah, the Corps tried that in the Basin, and they ended up with channels that were a lot wider than they predicted because they self-maintained too well.
No, they haven't done natural channel design down here.
Corps doesn't.
Anywhere.
Corps doesn't do any natural channel design in
No.
Louisiana.
Michael, can you explain those tubes? I kind of don't understand it. Do you insert the plant in the middle and it grows out and it expands that tube?
Yeah, so the tube, it's just a sheet of recycled plastic.
Okay.
It's a nutria guard.
Okay.
It's to prevent nutria from eating the trees.
Okay.
So what we'll do is we'll take a sapling. The sapling's usually about 1 to 2 years old in a 1 gallon pot. You plant it, you stake it, you put a bamboo stake next to it, you put the sheet of plastic and it has holes punched into it and you zip tie it. The reason we do that is because that 65% overall survival rate, if we didn't put those on there, that would be closer to about 0.
Oh,
We've had several, our early work, our early plantings, we've had 100% mortality.
so the nutrients are the biggest problems.
Absolutely. When we do put them on there, so we did the, just to give you like an example, so we planted about 2,500 trees, 2,500 trees, just south of Madisonville in February of 2021. We went out, and Hurricane Ida hit in August. We went out and monitored in January, February the next year, and 98% survival. So they do just fine. If they can be protected, the nutria are really the big problem.
A lot of people want to plant trees, but you need to check with Michael because he's got the science figured out on how to get a high success rate. A lot of people want to go out and plant trees. They can go out and plant thousands of trees and feel good about themselves, but there's no survival rate to none of that.
Yeah.
You have to use the science that Michael has developed to get this good success rate.
Okay.
And the salinity was a big factor. That was in the success rate, getting the salinity lower.
Yeah, absolutely, especially in an area like this, and I need to move on to the next one, but especially in the central wetlands, and we can circle back to this if we have time at the end. Well, another habitat that we have been involved with restoring, a much smaller scale, but still important habitat in this area is marsh. So Bayou St. John is entirely within the city. Here's the end of the bayou, and it opens out to Lake Pontchartrain. Bayou St. John is essentially completely urbanized at this point. The pictures you see on the right, that's what it looks like. This concrete, that's what the banks of the bayou looks like. If not that, it's a vertical bulkhead made of concrete. So virtually no naturalized shoreline. There are some stretches that look more like a natural shoreline, but they're few and far between. And so what we did is in 2013, we planted a fairly small, I think it's like a ½ acre of, but we planted a fairly small ½ acre wetland site. Right, one's right here on the side, and the other's on the side. Here's a picture, here's an aerial picture of it over here on the right. So that's one side of the bayou, and then the other side has the marsh. So it's about a ½ acre in scale. And we've been monitoring it for a decade now. And it's doing well. It's really showing no signs of any problems. It's a healthy marsh. We want to explore future opportunities in Bayou St. John, especially because it's in the urban landscape. There really are no habitat patches in the urban landscape. So Bayou St. John is a waterway that almost completely goes through the city. And so looking at opportunities of either taking out artificial banks like that, there's no flow in Bayou St. John, there's no real threat of you're not gonna win road into someone's yard. The worst that can happen now is the bayou has subsided as the city has subsided. And so there's gates at the end by the lake, and when they open those gates, they tend to flood people's yards. So it's almost always closed, just simply because of.
Has that
It's
half acre kind of expanded any?
Not necessarily expanded, however, what we have noted is that in the last year, when we go out and do our monitoring, submerged aquatic vegetation has taken root, sort of along the edges of the marsh. So the habitat is in a way expanding because that SAV is expanding.
Right.
Desirable or undesirable?
Desirable, highly desirable. Submerged aquatic vegetation, or SAV for short, is incredibly important habitat, especially along the South Shore, because it virtually doesn't exist anymore.
Are you finding that having the vegetation also is helping with the water quality in the bayou?
We haven't been testing water qualities in this site specifically, and we do sample Bayou St. John for water quality, but it's a little bit further down. I couldn't say for sure if that would have an effect. Certainly it's good at trapping sediment, things like that, so, and absorbing nutrients, so I'm sure it has an impact, I just don't know exactly what.
It would really need to be more on the upper end to,
Right, and it would probably need to be larger.
yeah.
You have any invasive problem?
Not that I can think of offhand, no. There are what we consider opportunistic species, but what we have seen in this site and the site that I'm about to talk about, what we have seen is that over time, those opportunistic species tend to get crowded out by the more, what we call more valuable species. But not that I can recall of invasive being a problem.
The better adapted.
Another marsh site that we've been actively working on, we didn't build this site. This is along Bucktown, along the lakefront. And you can see here, this is what it looked like in 1998, and then in 2020, and this is the patch that I'm talking about right here. So that's what it used to look like. This was put in 2003, I think. But by the end of the 20th century, the South Shore had lost virtually all of its fringing marsh. The levees had been put in place along the lakefront, and all of the fringing marsh, all of the edge marsh was gone. And so this was put in, and it's now, what's really cool about it is that it's a man-made marsh, and it's been around for 20 years now. So it's a perfect opportunity to look at, what did it look like before, what does it look like now? But one of those points that you brought up is that, in our 2022, it's a relatively healthy marsh, relatively meaning there are a number of opportunistic species, but they're declining over time. We've seen 20 plant species overall. The elevation of the marsh is stable, it's not subsiding, or at least not very quickly. There was no lasting damage from Hurricane Ida. So it's resilient to hurricanes, it's not sinking, it's got good quality species that inhabit it. And if you ever go down to Bucktown, if you're ever in that part of town, cross over the levee, there's just the crossover right here. There's a couple of gazebos. There's a new platform that was just built within the last year or so. It's a bird platform, and it looks out over the whole marsh. And you can just hear it. You can just hear that it's alive, and it sounds really good. It sounds like it's doing really well. But again, another little patch of habitat in the otherwise very urbanized New Orleans.
I think I remember you saying on the Bayou St. John restoration too, that it had attracted species there that were not existing in the areas around it. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, absolutely. The SAV, the submerged aquatic vegetation, that is definitely.
Well, I mean,
a species
some waterfowl and stuff
yeah.
that were going to that spot, but not other places near there.
I could see why they would go there. I don't remember. We don't necessarily look for wildlife when we're out there. That's not something that we're not keeping track of actively.
I thought that was one of the things you mentioned last time you gave the presentation.
Oh.
Maybe not.
I would assume that they would be out there more than.
Yeah,
more than
waterfowl's
surrounding
attracted to
spots.
SAB. I mean, that's good waterfowl habitat,
Yeah.
SAB. Yeah. If you didn't have it, you wouldn't have the waterfowl.
I might have just recalled something being out there and maybe having seen it. Well, a new habitat that we're looking at and expanding into are these oak ridges. So up on the right-hand side, I know the map is a little bit hard to see, but here's New Orleans. There's Lake Pontchartrain up here. This is Lake Bourne. And this, when I'm drawing my cursor along, is Bayou-Lutra, or what remains of Bayou-Lutra. And sometimes you'll hear people call it Bayou-Lutra Ridge. It's an old distributary of the Mississippi River that was active several thousand years ago, when the Mississippi River primarily flowed out into what is now St. Bernard Parish, before it was abandoned. The remnants of the Mississippi River are made up of sand. Those channels are very sandy, and sand in this environment is really good because it resists subsiding very well. And so what happens when the river abandons a delta and switches to somewhere else, the delta it's subsiding the whole time. Without any new sediment coming in, it just keeps subsiding. But what we find is that these remnant patches of high ground, these ridges, those are the remains of a Mississippi River channel, one of its distributaries. What's really cool about them is that they have very unique habitats. Because they're high ground, they're not permanently flooded. They support oak forests, live oaks, meadow palms, hackberry, Arlescent mulberry. You get an entirely different habitat within a very small little area. And it's really good because it just increases the biodiversity of the landscape. So what we've been doing is, since 2022, we've been doing these, I mean, I don't call them test plantings, but they are in a way, because we're sort of just dipping our toe into this habitat. But we planted roughly 750 trees. We have plans to plant another 1,500 more over the next several years along these, where these little squares are. I will volunteer plant. Most of these are, by and large, a lot of our plantings have been volunteer-made plantings. In addition to, the habitat, this is looking out at one of these ridges in St. Bernard Parish, and you'll notice that those old oak trees are no longer alive. They're the ghost forest. What we've seen, though, is that since the MRGO was closed 15, 17 years ago now, some of these trees are actually resprouting, which is pretty cool. You can drive down the highway and actually see like a resprouting oak tree. Because the salinities have come down just enough that they can come back.
So they weren't dead, they were just lingering.
I guess they were just hibernating. They can go dormant, they can be very stressed out, go dormant, and you want to patch up, it'll come back alive. Trees are really resilient in terms of like how they can wall off decay. They can, part of the tree can die, but another part just keeps going. So we're talking about decades.
As long as there's a water supply.
And this is the last habitat type. But kind of building on what we saw at Bayou St. John and looking at the opportunities that present themselves with submerged aquatic vegetation, we wanted to explore what that looks like. SAB is really cool, it's really unique. Like I said, along the South Shore, a lot of that habitat has been lost. But they're really neat facts about SAB, one of them being there's research that shows or suggests that they can absorb just as much carbon as forests can. They're really good in terms of fisheries habitat. If you plant this or have beds of it, it attracts the fish, which attracts the birds, which attracts the other one. You create habitat that way. It is tedious. You can see that doesn't look like It's not easy work necessarily, but it can be done if the conditions are right. And so what we did is this area, this work is happening within the central wetlands. So central wetlands is this area right here. And we planted that along what is Violet Canal. Kind of comes out this way. Again, since the closure of the MRGO, these areas have freshened up. They're primed to be, what is the word, rehabilitated? Reestablished or reforested, whatever word you want to use.
Restored.
Restored to something that it might have been like. And that's the end of the formal presentation. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you have.
Can I take away from the fact that the submerged aquatic vegetation are good for all these things, that there might be some positives in some of the invasives we're seeing, like in the basin, in the Chapel Basin? We have lots of hydrilla and giant salvinia, and of course the lilies.
The hyacinth.
Yeah. But are those just so aggressive that they clog up the area, or are they somewhat useful?
I think you have two, there's a few things in there from my perspective that I would maybe kind of qualify. A non-native species is very different than what we would consider an invasive. They're both not from here, right? But a non-native might not necessarily out-compete native species. The invasive ones, by the very term,
Right.
they are more aggressive. They're going to crowd out native species, which inherently I think is a net negative.
Yeah.
Now you can go down the argument, and I'm not offering a position on this either way, but when you talk about, okay, well, what about, is it better or worse to have an invasive tree that might be holding land together? That's when you're kind of like, well, you know, again, not offering a perspective on it, but I understand where you're going with that is, and I think ultimately it's situational. I think the invasives part of it, I think that's probably a net negative, but if you have a naturalized non-native species that is working, you know, not necessarily crowding out native species, but maybe kind of doing its own thing, you might find some positives.
Bill Fontenot used to say that there's some good in all trees.
I have a non-native invasive tree in my backyard, and it drives me nuts.
Probably a time.
Well, the hyacinth is a negative thing in Ascension Parish.
It's negative,
Yeah.
pretty much everywhere.
I would think hyacinth in almost every instance is going to be a
Some of
negative.
those invasive plants grow so thick
Yeah.
that they block out the sunlight, they absorb the nutrients, the ecosystem underneath basically begins to die and go away. So I cannot see any positive in something like
That's
that.
where you were going with the invasive part of it, non-native.
Yeah.
One of the things with invasives is they tend to come in to highly disturbed habitat. So the habitat is already not natural and healthy.
Easy to take
And
advantage
so
of.
having a good healthy habitat with the native species can compete better. They don't tend to grab hold, but you have a disturbance and like a hurricane, knocks down trees, then the tallow,
Yeah, the tallow question, so it's not a tallow in my backyard, it's called a golden rain tree.
oh yeah, those are,
And, they're all over my neighborhood, I live in the Bywater.
yeah,
all
those
over
are
my
a problem
neighborhood.
too.
But the tallow, one thing that we've noticed with the Oak Ridge work is that tallow work
Everywhere.
everywhere. And so much so that my team has basically come back to me and said, we need a few extra days. We need to do more site prep. We need to hack down tallow that are in the way to give these natives that we're trying to plant a chance.
Yeah, you have to get them out of the way or they will outcompete the
Yeah.
seedlings.
So We don't do invasive management per se, but we try to, as much as our budget will allow with these kinds of projects, that you do get into a sticky situation when you go to a funder and you say, I have, here's a project for $50,000 or $100,000 to plant trees. We want to plant, 1,000 trees in these different spots. The funder's like, okay, great. They're looking at your budget with a microscope. But if I tuck in there like, well, I want to do invasives management too, they're gonna balk at that. So it's almost like a catch-22. It's like, we realize that it's a problem and we want to try to address it.
Yeah.
But finding ways to be creative.
Well, a lot of times the controlling the invasives is more expensive than the planting project, and you have to do it more than once too.
I would agree with that.
Go back multiple years to.
We've got some active grant, we have some projects in the queue we're hoping to get funding for, where we're gonna go look at longleaf pine, which is a habitat we've never looked at prior, but again, valuable habitat. It's shrinking in scale. We wanna see if there's anything we can do to get into that space.
Are you looking at any projects in this part of the basin?
In this part,
Like
specifically-
hyacinth elimination.
Or any projects, I mean?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. No.
Where are you thinking of putting the longleaf pines at?
It's gonna be around the North Shore.
That's where they.
St. Tammany.
Madisonville and all that,
Yeah,
Manville?
probably St. Tammany. I think that was the parish that we had put into that proposal. Good question.
Yeah, this is-
Versace is doing a lot of work with longleaf pines, and they may have some ideas on best places to put it.
Who?
Versace National Forest.
Oh,
Johnny
okay.
Fryer's over there.
Okay. Yeah, we've talked to some people, the Nature Conservancy, and I think Pelican Park as another one. So we've talked to a few entities on the North Shore that have, because I kind of gloss over these points, but we don't plant, we have to plant somewhere. We plant on private property.
One of the problems that we've run into is that the Corps doesn't distinguish between native trees and invasives. And so they'll charge you mitigation if you want to go in and restore an area by tearing the bad trees down and putting the good ones in. They're getting a little better at that, but it's been a problem for us.
Yeah, Chinese tallow is the only species that the Louisiana State Legislature has actually deemed a noxious weed, that actually legislation that said you can kill them anywhere you want.
It's getting so bad. I drive,
Years.
I'm originally from Biloxi, so I drive I-10 to Mississippi. I've been driving that since, now, since I was a kid, 25 years. And it's amazing how much that's changed in just that short amount of time, really. You can see through the trees now. It's converting to open marsh. What's left of the trees are primarily tallow. And it's kind of, it's hard to see. Yeah.
Do you have any demo projects in the works currently?
Demo as a
Demonstration projects, anything that you can talk about?
Well,
Marsh building stuff.
All of them?
Yeah, the SAB is kind of a demo project.
Okay.
Like I said, it is labor intensive. You have to get these clippings, you have to make these transplants from somewhere. So one of our contractors, Eva Hillman, she also is an instructor at Southeastern. Eva's great. She's been around in our organization now for over a decade. And she is an SAB expert. And, she knows more about it than anybody I know. But they go and they harvest transplants, and she grows them out at Southeastern, and then takes the plugs and plants them where they need to go. So what's going to be really interesting is at the, later on down the road, go back and monitor. She may, I think, 4 rows within this, so like, they're planting along the bank of that bayou, probably like, 30, 40, 50 feet, different plugs. So they'll go back and they'll look and see what do they look like.
And you would monitor for 10 years or so, or however?
No, the monitoring is probably only gonna be about 3.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, with the nature of funding.
Yes.
Typically, yeah, it's a long monitoring season can be like 3 years for us. But what a lot of people don't really appreciate, and Ronnie kind of hit on this earlier, is that our organization is not just going in and putting these trees in the ground and leaving them. We're following up on them. And I think one of the coolest aspects of what we do is that follow-up, because then we can take what we see and actually apply it to the future. Like, case in point, maybe it's like the regional map. This area, the central wetlands, it's 33,000 acres of wetlands that are entirely within the levee system. There are only a handful of openings of gates that have a connection to the open Gulf, or open water. Since the closure of the MRGO, salinities, yes, have declined in general. But because it's entirely impounded, you're not really effectively flushing it out. So unless you have a constant flow of water, the soil tends to hold on to salt, right? It tends to hold on to it unless you're constantly flushing it out. There's no other than precipitation. There is a siphon. So there's a siphon called the violet siphon, and it's located right around here. It can move about 500 cubic feet per second. It's time to trickle. When we did a survey of the central wetlands about, I think it was in 2015 is when that report was out, the violet siphon had been running. And we did see declining salinities. Since about 2015, it's been broken, to figure. They apparently just fixed it. But I remember our parish doesn't want to run it. It's a diversion angle. They don't want to run it. What we've seen in our follow-up salinity, soil salinity sampling, is that salinities are actually rebounding in some spots because there are these hot spots of salinity that you are not effectively flushing out. We are part of a group of organizations collectively that are working in this area, and one thing that we're throwing out as like a caution is like, y'all be aware that there are not everywhere in this region is right to be replanted with cypress trees. The salinities are too high. And so that's something that we would only know that from our follow-up monitoring work.
When you also in that area, the stagnation, just in general, being a problem, not just the salinity, but if the water's not moving.
Correct.
Yeah.
And there are a number of canals that are dredged throughout the central wetlands, and then as a result you have spoil banks, and so you can kind of get doubly impounded and stagnant.
So could that potentially end up in a sort of Dead Sea type scenario?
No, I don't think to that extent. I don't
No.
think it would be.
Probably enough rainfall to keep it somewhat under
Marginal.
control.
So we have done plantings there. You know what the best spot to plant is there? We've almost filled it up. Pump stations. The outfall of the pump. So all of Chalmette in this part of the levee part of St. Bernard, they pump their water into the central wetlands. They pump their drainage water and their storm water. And the pump stations where the outfalls are really, really fresh. And we have completely planted them over with cypress trees. We've kind of run out of spots.
I used to do hydro map. Do you still do that?
We don't. We stopped producing that, I think, in mid-2021.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just
'Cause
funny.
those- Yeah, those were really interesting in that they showed the whole basin, and I found them interesting because they would show you also like where the rainfall was coming in through the waterways into the lake, and
Yeah, they did have a lot of information
They
on
gave,
them.
yeah.
But they're very expensive to produce, and, but one thing that we tried to understand was how they were being used, and we just, one, we couldn't really get we couldn't get funding consistently for it, and two, we weren't really sure that it was being utilized for as much as we were putting into it.
So a couple of things I want to say, and then I got a question, but we were very happy to have Michael and the Pontchartrain Conservancy feature the Bayou St. John project at the National Stream Restoration Conference this year. So that went over really well, I think. And I like hearing that, you know, the lady, I forget what her name was, but she takes, harvests, you know, local plants and,
Oh, yeah. Even
and transplants them, you know. So I think that's really nice. You talked about planting the trees on private property. Do you ever have any trouble with that on accessing private property and doing that sort of thing?
Not in general, no. Most landowners are thrilled.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're happy. The Delacroix Corporation owns a lot of the land that we planted around Carnarvon, and I mean, they're happy that,
Are most of these larger corporations and things like that?
yeah. A few of them are smaller-ish landowners, but for the most part, they are larger.
Yeah, I wonder if, well, now you have, you know, experience to build upon and people talking, you know, and you can show, look what it worked over here, but I wonder if you might have had, in the beginning, had some concerned people or, you know, got some hesitancy.
I mean, if there were,
Too insignificant?
probably too insignificant, I wasn't around at that point. But I'm sure it took a little while to get some buy-in from people. But then again, I mean, the landowners, they're out there. They're working on their land. I mean, Delacroix, they do, like hunting license, hunting for people, they let people out there. Increases their bottom line. And, you know, it's a more productive ecosystem. I think they do see the value in that.
I would. I'd say, come on.
And do you have a preferred season that you plant, or is it year round, whenever?
That's a good question. Planting season starts in November and lasts through about March. It's the time of year when the plants themselves are dormant.
Yeah.
Because if you try to plant them, well, one thing, I don't want to be out there like that
Energy
in
I love
August.
that.
I don't want to be doing that in
Yeah, you're
August.
right.
It's just a lot more difficult to do that kind of work. It's miserable, and then the plants, you risk mortality to
Too much
the
shot.
trees.
Hence been why I told you I was planting my plants now.
Yeah, I see that now.
Fall is for planting.
So we have a tree
Bump
nursery.
it in with bar.
I was, yeah, this actually does show it. Just off the frame here, just off that picture over here, we have a tree nursery. We lease a little bit of property from the Brown Foundation. We've had it since, I think, 2020, but we have a tree nursery with all of our all 5,000 of our trees that we plant up every year. So we let them hang out in Bucktown for a year. We get them as bare root. They're about this big, usually. And they're in bundles. We just got a grant from the Apache Corporation. They gave us 4,000 trees. So that's almost all of our annual planting for next year. They're about this big. They're about a year old. They're bare root, and we pop them, we let them hang out in Bucktown for a year, and then they're about this fall usually when they're planted.
And these are all locally sourced seed stores?
They're locally sourced, yes. I think generally, we change from time to time depending on availability. But yeah, I think these are all locally
And I know at
sourced.
one point, I forget, it may have been your organization, but there was an organization that was actually collecting cypress and other seed, I think live oaks as well, but from some of the remaining trees that were in the saltiest areas to try to get seed stock, genetic stock that could handle the salinity better and
Oh,
grow
okay.
them out.
We didn't do that, no. I mean, but a couple of our staff have had some oak trees and stuff in their yard, and they brought saplings to the nursery to go into the oak ridge work.
Michael, what's the planting distance like between the trees? How far do you generally try to put them apart?
About 15.
I know it's depending on your species.
Yeah, cypress is about 15-ish feet.
15?
Yeah, 15 to 20 feet. We plant at about 200 trees per acre. That's what we
Okay.
like to aim for. A healthy swamp is between 200 to 400. It's probably on the higher side of about 400, but 200 would be the minimum. Because as the trees grow, they obviously will start to form a canopy. They start to drown out the light to the marsh.
What would you consider an acceptable die-off rate?
A die-off rate?
Yeah,
Um,
or mortality rate from those plantings,
Well, our overall throughout the entirety of our plantings is around 65-70%, depending on the site. So I would say that is a reasonable target.
That's
So that would be
survival.
65% survival?
Yeah,
Okay,
about 65-70% survival.
okay.
Even with we did a seed germination experiment, because a few years ago, my predecessors were really interested in aerial seeding. That's like a large scale. We dropped 1 million seeds. Actually, we got a grant and we dropped 1 million seeds across different areas. We didn't find one sapling.
Oh my goodness.
We didn't find any.
Was it birds or was it?
We don't know. It's probably several factors at play, but we did a seed experiment to actually see like different conditions and whatnot. And I want to say that the general germination rate is about 50%. So only about half of your seeds will even ever germinate.
Under
That's
good conditions.
Under ideal conditions in a greenhouse with plenty of sunlight and water and, everything. I mean, we put them in the refrigerator to get them the cold snap they need.
Yes.
They had the whole shebang.
So the odds are very.
The odds were in their favor, you only get about half. Which I was kind of floored by, but I'm not an ecologist by training, but that's what the ecologists were like.
But birds will get some.
Yeah, I know.
And you have to have the moisture just right,
Mhm.
and that's why cypress forest, one of the reasons cypress forests so regenerative.
I know I'm a little bit over time, but I'll leave you with one more point. So we have worked a lot on the Manchac Land Bridge. We did what we call a regeneration study, looking at relevant swamps out here to try to understand why are these areas not naturally regenerating. That's kind of the overarching question. And we had people that went out here, were looking, and we're seeing no saplings. You're seeing mature, adult cypress trees, but no saplings. And could be a number of factors, but one thing that stuck out is that I say they didn't see any, they probably saw a few, but where they did see them, they were like high against the stumps of existing trees. Working theory, this area has subsided so much, there's no sediment coming into it. It's subsided so much. Cypress, in order to germinate, need a drawdown, and the tree has to grow for a little bit to get above the water. They need that drawdown. Sea level rise and subsidence, you're basically not able to get the drawdown. You're only getting maybe a handful of days per year, where it was 100 years ago or so. But you're just not getting the conditions necessary to naturally regenerate. And I thought that was pretty shocking.
Yeah, also that soil where it stays underwater, it just is soupy, it's like trying to plant in coffee grounds or something. It's not solid enough for a tree to actually
Take hold.
take
and
hold
germinate, yeah.
sometimes,
Any other questions?
How do you go about getting volunteers? That's that's my last question.
Oh, a variety, mostly through social media posts.
Okay.
We have we put that out on Instagram, Facebook, we'll put out calls for volunteers, usually a few weeks before an event. So we're getting ready for events now, so, if you follow us on social media, you'll see them there. There'll be a link to register and all the information will be provided if you wanna come out and meet us for planting.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you wanna help out at our nursery, the Bucktown, it's not hard to get to. There's always weeds that need to be tended, and especially trees need to get potted. And in the later part of the winter, we usually pot up around February. Always use an extra set of hands for that.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah.
Anybody else got questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.